Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Jesus Unmasked. I am one of your hosts, Adam Erickson, and I am here, as always, with Lindsay Paris Lopez. Hi, Lindsay. How are you today?
Hi, Adam. It's been a long day, but I feel good. How are you?
I'm fantastic and excited to talk about Jesus and the fire because
Yeah.
that's kind of scary.
Yes, it is. But Jesus tells us not to be afraid.
Isn't that
So,
weird? Like last week, Jesus was all, hey guys, no worries. It's all good. And now he's like, I'm coming to bring fire and I wish that it was already kindled. It's kind of like
yeah,
we don't really pay a lot of attention to this Jesus in progressive Christian churches. So I'm kind of excited to talk about what mimetic theory can help us understand about this Jesus who seems, I don't know, angry, upset, mildly disturbed, very disturbed. I don't know.
exasperated.
Yeah, that's a good one. There are all kinds of
Yeah,
words for it. Yeah, yeah. So,
yeah.
shall we just jump right into it?
Why not?
Okay, this is Luke chapter 12, verses 49 through 56. Jesus says, I came to bring fire to the earth, and how I wish it was already kindled. I have a baptism with which to be baptized, and what stress I am under until it is completed. Do you think that I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. From now on, 5 in one household will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. He also said to the crowds, when you see a cloud rising in the west, you immediately say, it is going to rain. And so it happens. And when you see the south wind blowing, you say, there will be scorching heat. And it happens. You hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time? Here ends our lesson this morning. May God bless us
Yes.
as we reflect upon it. So
Yeah. Yeah, this is
says the word of the Lord. Yes.
thanks be to God.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
We've got a couple of viewers with us. If you have comments or questions about this passage, which how could you not? You feel
Yeah.
free to put those in the comment section and we'll bring them in. So Lindsay,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts about this passage?
Well, when I first read it and I thought, this is Jesus angry and frustrated, and where do we see the hope, and where do we find comfort, and what are the signs of the times? These were all these questions that I had as I
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
yeah. Um, Yeah, I took off my glasses, by the way, because I think it gives too much glare and reflection, but now I can't see a thing. So,
Put your glasses back on, Lindsay. We can
no,
handle the glare and reflection. It's all good.
all right.
Whatever
All
you
right.
want to
Well,
do. But where did you want
it
to
is,
go with the fire
yeah.
and the hypocrites and the divisions among family?
You know what? I think mimetic theory really brings a lot to this section. So I want to talk about mimetic theory, and I also want to talk about social justice, and I want to talk about what the signs of the times call for. Where do we find courage? Where do we find hope? Because as I see it, the signs of the times look pretty bleak. Um, so I think we should just go through piece by piece because there's so much in here. Um, Jesus is saying, okay, before we started this, I wrote really quickly, hope for the vulnerable lies in division. And I want to get to what that means because Jesus says, I have not come to bring peace, but division. And that sounds unlike the Jesus we want to talk about. But
The Prince of Peace.
mimetic, yes, the Prince of Peace is bringing division.
Yeah.
But here's what's really fascinating. When peace is the relative calm that we feel over and against our enemies, when peace is a unity over and against others, and we feel good because we are keeping our enemies down, and we're not fighting because they're too powerless to fight us back. You know, that's not good for the people we consider our enemies, and the people we consider our enemies may just be the ones who are vulnerable. If we have the power to be at peace over and against others, then chances are we are keeping them down. And Jesus is disrupting all of that. And peace for, we don't see our enemies as vulnerable when we're looking at them through that lens. If we look at someone as our enemy, we don't see them as vulnerable. But Jesus is going to divide us so that we don't have unity over and against others. And I think that's just, he says, from now on, 5 will be divided, 2 against 3, and 3 against 2. That's not 1 against 4. That's not everyone against a victim. That's breaking up that kind of unity that we find over and against enemies. And for people who are vulnerable, for people who are treated as the enemy or the marginalized or the people that we feel better than over and against, to break up our unity is a defense of them. And, that's, yeah. I mean, I think about what the idea of "Make America Great Again," and I know I'm just jumping right into it now, but I'm thinking about that again part, and when was America great? And it harkens back to a time when people were vulnerable, and probably those who were not vulnerable were less divided as to whether or not to help people who were more vulnerable. So the greatness was very limited to some, and some never had it so great at all. And to try to harken back to that time is to try to form a unity over and against those who never had it great to begin with. And anything we can do to disrupt that kind of unity in order to build something better that's great for all of us for the first time is what we need to do. So,
yeah, I think part of what Jesus is getting at here is, you're able to look at the sky and see what's going to happen next, but you can't read the signs of the time. And what he means by that is, yeah, you get like nature and what's going to happen next with nature, but you don't really understand human nature and what's going to happen next. Right. Mm-hmm. And so this is exactly what you're talking about. The signs of the time are the signs of every time. It's this signs of Jesus's time, and it's the signs of our time, as you just have been talking about. It's the unity of finding unity over and against someone else, finding peace over and against someone else. And Jesus says, I'm not coming to bring that kind of peace. I'm coming to bring the fire. I'm coming to bring division. And so this, I think, is a lot of what we miss with fire language in the Bible, is that we instantly go to hell. So when Jesus says, I've come to bring the fire and how I wish it were kindled, he's not saying I've come to destroy the earth, so forget about global warming. So we'll just have more global warming because Jesus said he's going to bring the fire anyway. No, get that out of your mind. That's ridiculous. What he's saying is that fire throughout the Bible is a purification agent. And he's talking about how are we going to purify ourselves so that we get away from this finding a false sense of peace. Jesus, and this sounds a lot like actually the Gospel of John, when Jesus says stuff like, peace I bring to you, my peace I give to you, but I do not bring peace as the world brings peace.
Right.
Because the world, as you said earlier, brings peace through finding a common enemy. And that's not what Jesus is about. So he came to burn up that kind of way of finding peace in our lives.
And it starts with setting our hearts on fire for the vulnerable among us. And if we are vulnerable, it starts with setting our hearts on fire with a self-love that empowers us to, to not hide in the shadows anymore, to stand up and say, I will not be treated, I'm going to stand up for myself. And in standing up for my own dignity, I'm going to restore yours, because our dignities are intertwined together. It's a kind of forming of unity and community. But before we can get there, we have, it sows division, because it cuts through the old ways of seeing the world, and it cuts through, it cuts through the status quo and the cultural ways that we have built our understandings of ourselves and each other. It divides right through family lines too, and that can be very, very hard. I mean, Jesus says he will divide father against son and mother against daughter. When we feel ourselves, when we feel a compassion for the vulnerable, or when we feel a kind of self-love that tells us to stand up and take a risk, that will always, whether we're taking a risk for ourselves, and by that I mean for all the people who are vulnerable in the same way we are, or whether we're not vulnerable but we're taking a risk for people who are vulnerable, that will always cut through family lines, because it's easier and less risky to be quiet, And a lot of times the family lines will be divided, not just out of like, oh, you want to help these people, but I want to keep oppressing them. There may be some of that, but it's also about concern. It's about the risks involved in love. And often our family members will be the ones to try to hold us back from those risks, because they worry about us.
Yeah. And, sometimes families will be divided because we disagree about many of these issues. My family has been divided on these issues that we are currently dealing with today. And one of the things that I appreciate about this passage is that Jesus says, yeah, that's going to happen. You can expect that to happen.
Yeah.
Right. So there's almost this sometimes I think, oh, maybe I did something wrong to make this relative of mine so upset. And Jesus is like, maybe you did something wrong. Maybe you didn't do something wrong, but you can expect these divisions to happen. There's something kind of calming about that too. One of the things, though, that I want to warn against in this passage is that a lot of people on the right and the left will take these kinds of passages that Jesus says and they'll say, yeah, Jesus warned us that family members may turn against us, and that means that I'm doing it right and they're doing it wrong. Right? So they kind of take like this, if people start turning against you, it means that you're something like a prophet and that now you're doing it right. And so there can build up kind of a resentment in this, a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that we start making people, we start pissing people off with our words who we're against. And the more upset they get with us, the more we think, yeah, I'm doing this right because Jesus said that they would turn against me anyway. So it's almost like sometimes we take it as a license just to be jerks. And that's not what Jesus is saying.
No,
here, right?
No,
he's saying stand firm in in love, stand firm in your principles, stand firm, as you were saying earlier, in being with those who are marginalized and vulnerable, but don't start making out other people into the enemy. And that's like when Jesus starts going around calling people hypocrites, that's where I get really like tempted into using that kind of language. Like Jesus can get away with that, right? But can I get away with that? Like going, like that's kind of like me pointing the finger at others and I've got like 3-4 fingers pointed back at me. Like I can just be as much of a hypocrite as anyone else, especially when I start accusing them of being hypocrites. So Jesus also, gets upset and calls people a brood of vipers. John calls people a brood of vipers. And I think in Matthew 24, Jesus uses that same kind of language. Mm-hmm. And it's just very like when we Christians, it's important for us to have humility when we start breaking up the world like that, right?
Yes, like, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the measure is not how angry can you make everybody. Yes. That's not the measure of whether or not you're doing something right. I think the measure is, are you taking risks for the vulnerable people, which may be yourself, which may be others? Are you taking those risks? And if you're taking those risks, you will feel division against you. But, if you're in a position of power and what you are doing is making people angry at you, and you think that anger is, and you're making people angry at you because you're increasing your own power. I mean, you can get stuck in such myopia of like, hurting people and thinking you're right because people are hurting and therefore they're mad at you. And you take that as a further sign of we feel more self-righteous the more others feel righteous against us, or the more people get angry at us, the more we might tend to feel right in what we're doing just because of the way the rivalry works. Mm-hmm. But the measure is not how angry people get. The measure is, are we taking risks for people who are vulnerable? Because that will always be risky, and that will always turn people, that will always turn people who want to hold on to their power or their security, or would rather we hang on to our security. That will turn people, that will make people afraid, and fear will produce anger. And we have to tread very carefully in that because, if people are getting angry with us because we're helping the vulnerable, then I think we have to keep helping the vulnerable, but try to understand, because that will help bring people to understanding. And if people are getting angry because they're concerned for our safety, we need to know that too. We need to keep listening. And if we find people are listening less to us, we still need to keep listening. That's very hard to do. I think it will bring division, but the point of the division is to bring the marginalized into more community. So the end result should be more community, more unity, more communion. But it doesn't come without struggle, and it doesn't come without breaking things, I guess. Adam?
Okay, yeah. Lindsay, let's go break some stuff, and we'll put it all back together. How about that? Where's the good news in this? I would suggest, for me, the good news is when you do this, when you follow Jesus, he says you can expect division. And one of the great things about expecting the division is that you can prepare for it. So this, I think, is where prayer comes in, right? Yeah. Something is happening that's bigger than us, and people will turn against us. When we call out white supremacy, people are going to call us racists and say that we are now hating white people. Prepare for that so you don't get scandalized by it. Prepare
Mhm.
for it so that you don't respond with resentment back towards others. Prepare for it by praying so that you see the bigger picture that is happening as we
Mhm.
firmly take our place for
Right.
justice and more love in the world,
Right.
and so that we don't return the favor and scapegoat the scapegoaters. I think
And
that's one of the big keys here.
and I mean, I want to say this especially to white people. Um, prepare to feel uncomfortable
Yeah.
when we're called out on what we do wrong, because that's people standing up for themselves. It will make us uncomfortable, and we will probably want to respond with, I'm not a racist. Oh, you misunderstood me. That wasn't my intention. And when we do that, that feeds into division more than just saying, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize what I was doing. Thank you for pointing that out to me. We need to be prepared for that too, because, a lot of our default will hearken back to the status quo that Jesus is breaking. And so we need to be prepared to speak the truth in love, but also to hear the truth in love. And I mean, some of the signs of hope for me right now are, we're talking about reparations on a national scale. It hasn't happened yet, but the unity used to be, at least among, I think the idea used to be, oh, that's maybe a good idea, but it's a pipe dream that will never happen.
Mm-hmm.
Or it used to be, well, we can't possibly do that. And, now it's really being talked about,
Yeah.
and there's some division, but we won't make progress unless we go through that division. And I used to hear, the debate about immigration used to be about what can we do to make our borders stronger. And now that we see the complete inhumanity happening on our borders, many people are speaking up for migrants coming, and it seems more divided. There's more, it's not both sides talking about what we can do to strengthen our borders. It's, and I will say that, I think both sides do want some kind of border, but I'm hearing more talk about how can we be more humane on one side. And that's, I feel like some of the things we never talked about before are being talked about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of division that can bring hope that Jesus is talking about. I want to see more. I want to see more division on a national scale when it comes to talking about things like military budgets and wars. I want to see more. I want to see less status quo about, we're going to keep on increasing the military budget because that's what we do and we don't even talk about it. I want to see more division in that area. So, and this doesn't mean I want to turn against people who disagree with me. It means, a lot of conversations that weren't even started need to start. And we need to get through the difficulties and talking about them so that we can,
Yep. Tim says amen, and clapping hands there. So, friends, those are our thoughts on this passage that I think most Christians would rather avoid. But I am grateful for Rene Girard and mimetic theory and how he helps us understand this fire language and scapegoating and division. And Lindsay, I'm so grateful for you for helping me understand it even further. And Tim, thank you for the claps and the amen. And thank you everybody for watching this episode of Jesus Unmasked. We will do it all again next Wednesday. Maybe? We haven't figured that out
Ooh.
yet. Stay tuned on the
Um,
Raven Facebook page.
Not quite Wednesday, but we'll see.
We'll figure it out. Stay
We will
tuned
let
on
you know.
Raven, and we will let you know. You can, if you like this, please feel free to share it with your friends. And until then, grace and peace be with you. Bye-bye.
Peace be with you. Thank you.